Good evening, and welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee meeting of Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. There is a quick reference card placed on the desk in front of you, which provides instructions on how to use the basic speaking function of the microphone. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent. I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. Thank you. First item, number 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies of absence from Councillor Fisher. We have Councillor Douglas here in his place. Also, Councillor Hewson is stepping in for the Mayor, who's ill at an official function, and Councillor Evans is deputising. And late this afternoon, I had apologies from Councillor Stedman, who's unable to come this evening. Thank you. Any other apologies? No, thank you. Number 2, the minutes. To confirm the minutes and exempt minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January 2022. I'm going to propose the minutes. However, there is one item to be corrected on the minutes. It says that at on page 5 of our papers, item number 113, it mentions Local Government Act 1972, access to information, exempt information, under paragraph 1. It should actually be paragraph 3, and the minutes will be amended accordingly for that. So I'll propose, subject to that amendment, the minutes are accepted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Webster. Number 3, declarations of interest. Do we have anyone wishing to make any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda this evening? I'll take that as a no. Item 4, I will introduce Rachel Ashley-Cornt, our Chief Internal Auditor, to provide a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Chairman. So the first report that we have for you this evening is an update on the delivery of the current year's internal audit plan. So the report will be in the usual format that the members of the committee will be familiar with, but I'll just take you through some of the key sections and provide updates where I can, obviously since the report was produced. So there is a copy of the internal audit plan for the year in the appendix on pages 22 and 23 of your papers this evening. So this sets out all of the assignments within the current year's internal audit plan, the status of those as at the time of producing the progress report, and the outcomes of those which have now been completed. So as at the time of reporting, obviously we've made good progress against the delivery of the internal audit plan. There are a couple of assignments that were still in progress at the time of reporting. Those are continuing to be underway, and we're making good progress on those. Just to reassure the committee that anything that's finalised since following this meeting, obviously we're not quite at the end of March, anything that's finalised following this will be included in the annual report, which the committee will receive at the next meeting. So you'll receive the outcomes of all of those remaining assignments at that point. So at the time of reporting, we had finalised a further 4 audits from the internal audit plan, which are summarised for you in section 2.5 of the report as usual. So I'll just take you through the key sections there. So I'm really pleased to be able to report really good progress and really good outcomes on the audits this year, and at this time from the last meeting, the audits that have been completed. I think there's a lot of positive assurance opinions here that hopefully give the committee some assurances in some of these really key areas. So the first was in relation to procurement compliance. So members of the committee will recall this is an audit we do on an annual basis. So we basically look at a sample of contracts which have been awarded during the last 12 months and whether those have been compliant with the council's contract procedure rules, and whether the contracts register is up to date and fully reflects all of our current live contracts. So we have made a number of recommendations in this area in previous years, particularly around retaining a good audit trail to evidence the procurement process and the compliance with the key rules and conditions. And we were really pleased with the findings that we had from this year's sample testing. So we looked at a sample of 7 new contracts, and in 100% of cases, we were able to confirm compliance with the contract procedure rules in how the contract had been awarded, which is obviously a vast improvement on previous years. We identified a couple of issues in relation to the sealing of contracts and the publishing of award notices, but the actual procurement process had been fully compliant in all cases. So that's really good progress, I think, and then that reflects a lot of the work that's been done in terms of the training and awareness that's been completed as a result of previous actions from the audits in the last few years. So we did also look at the contracts register. There are still some areas where this needs to be continued to be developed and updated. So we haven't made any formal recommendations because it is a work in progress as at the time of the audit. And we will look at it again next year when we revisit this area, and hopefully the work will be completed at that point. So based on the findings and the progress that's being made, we didn't make any formal recommendations at all this year in relation to procurement compliance. And we've got a good level of assurance overall. The second is in relation to performance and risk management. So this one would be one that's particularly interesting to this committee as you have a role in terms of risk management and the risk management strategy. So we looked at the new framework that covers both performance and risk management, and we wanted to look at whether or not it's a robust framework, and then also look at how it's being complied with in practice, and whether it's operational. So we were really satisfied with the coverage of the framework. It seemed clear, concise. We looked at the content in comparison with other local authorities within our group, and were satisfied that it covered all of the key areas. It also is strong in that it focuses on the council's corporate strategy. So you're linking it to what you're trying to achieve as an organisation and forward looking and focusing on those objectives. Based on the testing that we performed as well in terms of risk management, we were satisfied around the coverage of the risk registers. So you've got the corporate risk register, which obviously comes to this committee. You've also got directorate level risk registers where those risks are being managed and escalated as appropriate, and that seemed to be working well. And obviously we also looked at the performance side of things as well in terms of that framework, and again we didn't have any areas of concern. There were any areas that we needed to flag to the committee's attention. That seemed to be working well and ensuring accountability and transparency around how our services are being delivered. So again, another audit with no formal recommendations made as a result, and a good level of assurance. So nothing else I need to flag to your attention on that one. The third was in relation to COVID-19 recovery. So I think this is quite an interesting review, and it's one that we've done with all of the councils within our shared internal audit service. So it's nice to be able to do a bit of comparison. So we split this into a couple of areas. We looked back at how the council responded to the pandemic at the time. We're not going to want it to drag over too much because obviously it's been and gone, but looked at that and reflected on that and any lessons learnt. But we also focused on how we're making sure that the council recovers effectively and looks at lessons learned and takes those forward effectively in looking at business continuity plans and how we change our ways of working in light of some of the things that have been learned. So as you'll see, we've given a substantial assurance opinion on this, which is the highest assurance opinion. And I can actually say that's the highest of all of them that we did in our group. As I say, we've done this at all of the councils I work with, and that's the highest assurance opinion that we've given. There were some really strong areas for Melton in comparison with some of the other authorities, particularly around the recovery phase, where there's this link between recovery, but also looking at general corporate and service planning, which we thought was a really strong approach. And that's integrating those two processes and looking at how we develop improvement in line with that. We've also got the reflection in terms of business continuity plans and making sure those are reflecting any lessons that have been learnt from the incidents. In terms of the response to the original pandemic and the updating of governance and decision making, that all seemed robust as well, and we had no issues to highlight at all in relation to that. So again, quite a good clean bill of health, no formal recommendations again on that report, so that's a nice thing to be able to say, and nothing else I need to draw to the committee's attention. And the last report was in relation to project management. So here we looked at a sample of 5 projects. And just to be clear, this wasn't an audit of the projects. So we weren't looking at those individual projects and how they're being delivered or the progress or their budget or anything like that. What we were looking at was the council's budget project management framework. Is it robust? Does it cover all of the key areas? But also then how is it being applied in practice on that sample of projects? So again, we were actually really impressed with the framework here. So the framework that the council has put in place for project management is actually aligned with Prince 2, which is seen as the best practice model really in this area. And a lot of councils I see do aspire to Prince 2 methodology and a lot of the ways of working. But I think this is one of the first times we've seen that it's almost aligned with that and really embraces a lot of those key areas and the primary documentation we'd expect to see in line with that methodology as well. So because it's a good framework, when we looked at the sample of projects, those that have been complying with it fully, there was a really good, effective and consistent audit trail as to how the project had been managed. We were able to assess the compliance there quite easily because there was a good level of documentation available. One of the things we did identify was one project where there had been some external support. So it's just making sure that in cases like that, we're making sure that any external advisors are also using the same methodology. So that's one potential area that we've highlighted for improvement, just to make sure that that's consistently applied. We did also flag that whilst risk management was being well embedded within each of those projects, there wasn't a clear link between the council's risk registers that we mentioned earlier and the project risk registers. That's not to say it wasn't happening, because actually when we looked at that sample of projects, it was evident that where there were risks that had been escalated, they had gone onto the strategic risk register. So we did see examples of that in practice, but technically on the framework and the procedures, it's not that evident that that would happen. So it's just tightening that up a little bit in terms of the design of those frameworks for risk management on projects. But otherwise, there was nothing that we highlighted as any area for improvement or any weakness that I needed to flag to the committee's attention. There were a few recommendations just to strengthen some of the controls in this area, but nothing that I needed to flag to the committee's attention. And as you can see from the assurance opinion, there's substantial assurance on the design of a very robust framework that we were really impressed with, and good compliance based on the sample of projects that we looked at. So quite a positive report, I think, this time for you as to the outcomes of those audits. So also within the report on page 28, there is an update on the implementation of open audit actions. So we have got 10 recommendations which have been implemented since the last committee meeting. 3 of those were high priority, so that's really good to see the progress on those, and some of them had been reported to this committee previously, so I'm pleased to be able to take those off the report going forward. We do still have one that falls into the category of high priority and over 3 months overdue, so that's provided on page 29 with a full update as to the latest status. So we have got a revised date in there at the end of April. This has been a much more significant piece of work than we had initially expected when the audit was completed. So there is a full review of the service underway, and I think that's reflected within the update from the offices in that paragraph, on the latest update paragraph in the middle of the report. So that's a quick run through of the report, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of the detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Before we open the debate, I'd like to invite proposer and a seconder. Proposer first. Proposed by Councillor Illingworth. That is the proposing to note the report and progress made by the internal audit team in the delivery of the audit plan. Seconded by Councillor Posnett. Thank you. I'll now invite members to debate the report. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is a vast improvement from where we were a year or even 2 years ago. But as you'd expect, although I congratulate the staff on doing what they've done, I just want to ask about Appendix 3 and 4, because I'm a bit confused by that. Under Appendix 3, it makes clear that actions due overdue within 3 months and action overdue with over 6 months, I think are 3 items. However, I see in Appendix 4, there is only 1 item that is mentioned. So how does that quite tally when there are 3 that have not been completed within 3 months and 6 months, and yet in Appendix 4 we only see 1 report? Maybe I'm wrong because I'm a sub in audit and standards, but so that's page 28 and page 29.
Through you, Chair, are you happy for me to? Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I'm happy to just confirm on that. So just working through that table then. So the first row is actions that have been implemented.
Yep.
The second row is actions which were due within the last 3 months.
But
So those
not-
are not yet
yeah,
3 months overdue. And then the next one is 3 to 6 months and then over 6 months. So within this table, we've only in Appendix 4, we only look at those that are over 3 months. So that's only those in the bottom 2 rows. Because the 2 in the within 3 months are not yet over 3 months overdue.
Oh, I see what you're saying, but surely they should be of concern because obviously there are actions that should have been completed in an ideal world.
In an ideal world, yes, obviously they're all overdue technically,
correct.
but we usually we report full details when they become over 3 months overdue. Is just a standard practice of what we usually report to the committee. Under this category, they could be literally a few days overdue when they're in that category. So we usually give them a little bit of leeway to get those completed. If they continue to become overdue by the next meeting, obviously they would be in full in the Appendix 4. You get full details in there. That helps.
I suppose, Chairman, sorry, to me, audit goes back a long way for me, but when I was on audit, anything that was overdue from when it was meant to be coming in was a yellow flag or red flag almost, because you're given a task to do by a certain period. And if you don't do it, to me, and this is what happened in Rushcliffe, if you go beyond that, then there's problems, because that's what us as members expect. If we get a due date for action and it's not made within that period, then I was told in Rushcliffe that's an audit problem, because that means there's a reason why that timescale is set. And there is a reason if it fails, why that should be immediately reported and dealt with. And I'm surprised there isn't at least a mention of the 2 that are overdue. Sorry, but that's my view.
Councillor Evans. Yeah, there may be, and we've had this before, there may be good reasons why they're not yet implemented, but actually this report has made substantial progress over the last 3 meetings. Rachel went through the numbers that have implemented, and we've now only got 1 recommendation, which is going to take some time. And there's a date on Appendix 4 where we had more. So in the progress is going the right way. And I don't think at this stage, I'd note this for the next meeting and see what the travel is down the page at the next meeting, and then we can look at it in that way. But I get your principle of your point, but this is significantly improved over the last few meetings. Yeah, if you'd have been, yeah, if you've seen the principle, but I did.
My training was that anything that's overdue, I was told if there's the red flag is obviously on the 6 months one, but there is a possibility that the 3 months ones are flags because of the one that's on 6 months, or could be in the same department, which is failing already on 1 and could be failing on 2 other things. And I was always told that members needed to know which departments were failing to meet their actions, because there could be an inherent problem in 1 department because of staffing or whatever. But you're right, there's a red flag on the 6 months, but I was always taught the 3 months one is yellow flags, and members needed to be aware of where those yellow flags could turn red.
I do think the classification is actually reasonable, and I think it's reasonable for us to get them at that time. I do get your point about being overdue, but I don't see at this stage that there's a significant issue with the ones that don't end up in in Appendix 4 at the moment.
Just get an assurance then in 3 months' time, this will be looked at again, but if these actions are red flags by them, which they would be, obviously. Yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Holmes.
I'm sure everybody's better at audit than me, but anyway, page 25 of the here we've got, reading across here, this compliance assurance. There's satisfactory here, and at the end it says the control environment has mainly operated as intended, although errors have been detected. And then the next one, which is limited, the control environment has not operated as intended. Significant errors have been detected. I don't understand. Can somebody explain about this, please?
Yes, I'll explain.
Thank you, Chair. So just to explain, so on page 25, this is the definitions of the different categories that can be applied to audits. So if we were to give an audit a satisfactory opinion in relation to the control environment, this is just gives you an idea of what that means. So that's how that would translate. So the audits that we've presented to you this evening have all been at least good or substantial. So they've been in those top 2 rows. So that just gives you an idea of how we interpret what that assurance rating means. If that,
well, that's what I thought it was, but I just wanted
yeah,
to absolutely 100%. Right, thank you.
okay,
That's fine.
Councillor Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm substituting this evening for Councillor Fisher, so I'm asking a question that you may all be familiar about the topic of, if you like, but obviously to me it's all a little bit new. It's page 23, the Intensive Housing Management Service. I could understand if you were looking at the Housing Management Service, that would make sense, but the word and the use of the word intensive, is this a new service then with the word intensive in it? Is it specifically a new project that's recently been set up? Thank you.
Director.
No, it's not a new service. It might have been called different names in the past, like supporting people, etc. So the terminology's changed, but the service has been there for a considerable amount of time. And it's for those residents that require additional support, that are more vulnerable, and they need that maybe like a warden scheme, those sorts of things. So that additional support in addition to their actual housing needs.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Evans.
Something I'm just going, and obviously it doesn't involve the internal audit as such, but it does. On page 23, it goes on about the planning service review, and it says field work complete. I know I'm well aware that the councillor who is leading the planning service review is no longer in post as such. And I'm well aware that there was still at least 1, if not 2 more meetings of that review before it was completed, and it never was completed. I know that for a fact because I was on that planning service review. So I'm quite surprised it says field work complete, which implies it has been completed. And I was assured before by Jim before he left that the field work review, the work on the planning service review was not complete, and there was still work to do on it.
There might be a bit of a misunderstanding between the councillors that were involved in a review and the internal audit plan review. It's not the same thing. This is the internal audit work, and their auditors have finished the field work and they're going to be discussing the findings and putting the report together. Anybody, any other councillor? Thank you. We'll move on. Thank you very much for that, Rachel and councillors. The internal audit plan. I'll invite Rachel back again, our Chief Internal Auditor, to provide a brief introduction to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is looking ahead to the new financial year, which is creeping up on us quite quickly. So this is looking at the schedule of internal audit work that we'll be delivering for you from the 1st of April. Which will inform our annual opinion, of course. So I have spoken to you as a committee about the process that I was following to develop the internal audit plan at previous meetings, and also consulted with you. I have also consulted with the cabinet members and with chairs of other committees via the chair. So we've had a lot of good feedback from elected members, as well as obviously the usual consultation with senior management as well. In addition to my review of all the risk registers and the corporate plan, and all of the key areas that we talked about at previous meeting as to the things that factor into and inform the internal audit coverage. So the paper this evening sets out the process we followed to develop your audit plan. And then a copy of the audit plan is provided at Appendix A to the papers from page 39. So I don't intend to go through all of the assignments line by line, but I'm happy to provide any further insight into what we plan to do or why it's made it onto the audit plan if helpful. A couple of the areas that I just flagged to the committee's attention that may be of interest. So on page 41, we've included an audit on landlord health and safety. Some members will recall we did this audit a few years ago, which obviously flagged a number of areas of concern. We did do then a follow-up, which showed some really good progress being made. We didn't do any coverage in the last year, and I think it's probably timely now for us to go back and do a review just to re-perform the audit and make sure we're happy that the framework is now robust and that all of the assurances are there around gas and asbestos and electricity and all of these key areas that we wanted to make sure the checks were in place and evidenced for all of our tenanted properties. So that's included in the audit plan for next year. We've also included an audit on the health and leisure project. So I just wanted to mention this one because this is something that we're trying to involve internal audit more upfront in the work that the council does. So looking at real-time audit work. So rather than looking at a project at the end and what could have been done better, I think it's much more valuable for internal audit to be engaged from the outset. And that's what we're seeking to do with this project. I appreciate it's early days, but I just wanted to inform members that that's why it's in here at this point. And we want to try and engage and provide an embedded assurance effectively in relation to that project. We've also got some reviews around some of the key areas such as information governance. So we've not revisited this area since we looked at the implementation of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So it's useful to review that again and revisit that. We've also got some, obviously the key financial controls that we look at each year. We cover on a cyclical basis, and any key areas and risk areas that crop up during the year, we can focus on as well. We have also got a review on page 40 of cyber security. So I think this is one of the council's key risks, to be honest, for any local authority. And we are planning to work with the council's ICT partnership on this to try and get some understanding around how we have preventative and detective controls around the council's IT systems, and get some good level of assurance around that. So that's something that we'll be prioritising as well for early in the year. So that's, as I say, I won't go through all of the areas in detail, but I'll be happy to talk about any of those further if you have any queries. Also provided in the papers this evening as Appendix B is a copy of the Internal Audit Charter and Strategy. So this is a document that comes to this committee on an annual basis, and it basically sets out how we deliver your internal audit service. So it is in line with the public sector internal audit standards, and I haven't proposed any changes to this strategy compared with previous years. So it's all pretty standard, but obviously it's seeking your approval that you're still happy that that's the basis on which we deliver your service. And finally, there is a further recommendation in the covering report in relation to a delegation to enable us to make changes to the internal audit plan during the financial year. And this again is a recommendation we make every year. So it's nothing unusual, and it just enables internal audit to be responsive to changes in the council's risk and governance framework. So if any new emerging risks arise, we can be responding to those and not waiting for the next audit committee to be able to get that approved. If we did make any changes under that delegation, I can assure the committee that that would be reported at the subsequent meeting, so you would have an insight and an awareness of that anyway. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but that's a quick run through of the report.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Prior to debate, I'll invite a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations that the committee review and approve the internal audit plan for 2022-23, which is Appendix A, approve delegated authority for the Director for Corporate Services in consultation with the Chair of the Audit and Standards Committee to agree amendments to the plan during the financial year if required, and approve the internal audit charter and strategy Appendix B. Thank you. Proposer, Councillor Illingworth, seconded Councillor Webster. I'll invite debate, but I'll just say beforehand the debate, when the subjects were collected in from all the sources, senior leadership team, chairs, cabinet members, and myself and members, there was a draft plan produced, and the Director of Corporate Services, Rachel, and myself sat down, and I think it was 2.5 hours looking at the justification for the subjects, the importance in the plan, and what didn't go in the plan. So there was, from start to finish, there was a lot of consideration in what goes into the plan. Thank you. Now I'll invite you to debate. Councillor Douglas.
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. A comment actually, just a bit of positive, really. I noticed on page 41, you've got the licensing down as a topic to be looked at, and I would just like to say, as Chair of Licensing, I am pleased to see that there, and I'm sure my deputy here may agree, I'm not sure, but Prue Chandler, also councillor who's helping me on that committee. We've had a busy year so far, and I just wanted to say I am pleased it's there, because it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that. I should be watching that with interest, whether I'm on the committee as a substitute or not. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I always get a bit nervous on substitutes, but I'll carry on trying to do the best I can. Obviously, I always find it fascinating how internal audit seem to be masters of everything, or need to be masters of everything. Having been in IT myself, I know that cybersecurity, for instance, is something you have to spend 10 years getting to know how to do it, let alone actually invoke it, and it moves on a daily basis. I presume we are getting real experts to actually understand whether we're up to date with that, because I'm well aware that even in my old firm, even though we had experts, we were hacked. And obviously, in the present political climate, we've got to be incredibly careful with our web services. By the way, Chief Exec, one of your web services is failing to provide the minutes at the moment, but never mind. Yes, second meeting in a row, I'm not being able to go onto the Melton website and get our minutes up. Could I just ask the chair, through the chair, the one thing I noticed that seems to be missing, and it does surprise me in a way, is I'm well aware that the housing allocation system is being changed significantly this year, and there will be a significant change in the way, you know, people who come to it are being assessed. And Mike, and even in that meeting where we talked about it, the people in housing said, we're well aware this is going to cause, or could cause, issues in that the residents will be concerned that suddenly their valuations and everything could be changed and there'll be appeals. I'm aware, and I'm sure the Chief Executive is aware, that in another council there's been real issues over housing allocations recently. And I just feel in an internal audit process, we really should be watching very carefully. And I'm not blaming our officers, I'm just saying we need to, in my opinion, be checking that that system is invoked properly, fairly, and an internal audit, in my opinion, is the right way to do that, because this year, everybody's, as I understand it, everybody who's on our list, waiting list, is going to be reevaluated under a new system, under a new software. And that's where, I'm sure you know, Don, as well as I do, that's where mistakes can come easily forward, depending on how well it's done. And I think that process is very important to our residents, and it's something that we, in internal audit, in audit and standards, should be looking at very carefully this year. That's just my view, but I'm well aware if it goes badly wrong. I've been in a council where it went badly wrong. If it's not reviewed properly at that time, then accusations can be made and will be made. I'm sure that it won't go wrong here, but I'm just surprised there's nothing in here about resources being put on it to check this system going forward, because it will be a significant change in our policy happening this year. Sorry to rant on, but I'm worried about it because there seems to be no internal checking of whether it's being done fairly.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's one of a number of so I'll let you come in, Councillor Holmes.
If I could be of any help, I have mentioned it to the Deputy Chief Exec about some people who thought they were on the register and then they weren't sure they were on the register. And we've done this twice. And then I had somebody else from actually Councillor Hewson's ward wants to come back into my ward, etc., etc. And at this moment, it appears to be working because people who didn't think they were on the list, it's all been sorted with them. So I think that we probably are getting much more up to date in my area, it is anyway. So I think that could only be helpful, I think.
It's one of a lot of things that the officers are implementing, and I do see the significance. And I think that if we were to note that it was sensitive, so the housing management, because it's not made the plan, you know, check their own implementation of the system this year, there's significance, we can pass that on. In respect of something a little bit more devious, touching on the counter fraud end, that would be included within the counter fraud risk register and the relevant cyclical work relating to that. And we are aware of sensitivities in that area. So it is being dealt with. I think that's a fair comment, Director, isn't it, that one? Yeah. Did you want to come in, Rachel?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So also just to reassure members that we do on a cyclical basis do an audit on homelessness and housing allocations, which obviously is looking at that process in detail, both in relation to temporary accommodation, but also in terms of those on the housing list being allocated to houses. So the last audit we did on that was a couple of years ago. I would just mention on page 41, sorry, we have got an audit there on the management of the HRA. Whilst that is looking at particularly around things like the HRA business plan and how that's being delivered, I have mentioned in there as well the management of associated risks. So if the committee wanted me to note that as one of the risks that we look at in terms of the HRA, because I think that is one of the key risks personally, it would have been one of the ones I would have suggested, we can pick that up as part of that audit, just to look at some targeted testing around how we manage the risk around allocation of properties. If that would be helpful, I can take that away.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. I think the next stage now is to vote, and the vote would be we review the internal audit plan for 2022-23, and we approve the delegated authority, the Director for Corporate Services and the Chair of Audit and Standards Committee to agree and amend the plan during the financial year, if required, and approve the internal charter and strategy. Appendix B. If we could have a vote for by show of hands, please. I think that is unanimous, I think. Thank you for that. Moving on, item 6, whistleblowing policy. Kieran Stockley, the monitoring officer, to provide a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The report before you today is following a review of the whistleblowing policy, which last came before the Audit and Standards Committee in 2019. It's good governance to ensure that we review it regularly and that it's up to date. So we have pretty robust processes in place to deal with whistleblowing, and a consistent approach is taken across the council. We've reviewed the policy, and at 5.5 of your report, it details the changes that have been made to the policy. The draft Policy went to Joint Staff Working Group on the 3rd of March. 2 comments were made at Joint Staff Working Group addressed at 5.9 of your report. Both of those comments were accommodated. No further comments have been received, members. So the report today before you is to note and endorse the revisions to the whistleblowing policy, and then to recommend to Council that it be approved to be effective immediately. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Kieran. Before any debate, can I invite a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed, Councillor Posnett. You have it. Seconded, Councillor Holmes. I'll open the debate now for members to comment on the whistleblowing policy. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. The highlighted parts in yellow, are they the new additions or what? You know, there's quite a few parts highlighted in yellow throughout. Thank you.
Kieran.
Yes, Councillor Douglas, for ease of reference, I highlighted the bits that we'd amended so that members weren't trying to pick out what bits we'd changed through the various consultations that we'd done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Evans.
I don't know if this is an appropriate question, but I'll ask it because I think it's important this is an important policy. Whistleblowing is very much something that the government are behind and think is important in any public body and private body. Without obviously mentioning names or whatever, has this ever been invoked in Melton Borough Council?
So in the time that I've been monitoring Officer Councillor Evans, I did a review before bringing this to the committee, and there's been no whistleblowing complaints made in the past year. Before my time, I couldn't tell you. I'm looking for assurances from Dawn.
Yes, in my time, which is a long time at the council, it has been invoked, but I think in Rachel's time as well, it's been invoked as well.
I'm personally only aware of one. I think during my time, which is since 2014, I've been only party to one, I believe.
Yeah, and I would say before that one other, but that was considerably before then. I think it's sometimes quite difficult. People don't often say I'm making a whistleblowing. They bring something to you, but you know it's a whistleblowing and you treat it as such, but they probably don't actually tell you that's what they're doing. They just raise a concern.
Anyone else? The recommendation is that we note and endorse the revisions to the whistleblowing policy. Recommend to Council to approve the revised whistleblowing policy to be effective immediately. If you could show those in favour by raising your hands, please. Unanimous, I think. Thank you. Item 7, risk management update. I'll invite Dawn, Director of Corporate Services, to provide a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Chairman. So the report provides an update on the latest position regarding risk management, which is an additional report to the usual annual report that comes each September, and that's as per committee's request last year. From the internal audit progress report, you'll have seen that the recent audit of risk management has given good assurance over both the control environment and also compliance with the risk management framework that's in place. And as well as providing an update on the risk register and the direction of travel since the last report last September, the report also particularly highlights the work that we're planning on undertaking in the coming months, particularly a planned review and refresh of the current policy and strategy that's in place. That's just timely anyway, because that policy and strategy is now coming up to 3 years since the last major review. So that'll be a timely review, but also as well, working with the council's insurers and risk management advisors, will engage much more heavily with the chair this time, and also members of this committee through a workshop and training session. And the aim is to finalise that work, ready to do to bring that new policy to the meeting of this committee in September. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dawn, on that one. Before going to debate, I'd like to invite a proposer and a seconder, please. Proposed, Councillor Illingworth. Seconded, Councillor Evans. Thank you. I'll open the debate now, please. Anybody? Councillor Douglas.
Yes, I remember years ago when I first became a councillor, so that's way back in 2011, page 80, I'm referring to the leisure contract and the risk around leisure. We considered putting it out to the private sector, looking for somebody who'd actually, you know, build a swimming pool, I suppose, really, amongst other things. And I haven't really seen a lot around that over the years. This that this is actually taken seriously, that it's a potential route, a good option. I'm just surprised I haven't really seen any work around that at all. Is there any consideration about the private sector at all in with the leisure provision? I'm just wondering.
There is a project underway, and there was a briefing session for councillors. And I think everything's on the, on the table that officers are looking at a business case for the future of leisure. But I think that's a question to develop outside of this agenda tonight. But that is, I think, is that correct?
I can see the chief exec wants to come in as well, but I mean, you referred back in an incredibly long amount of time there, and I think leisure has had. There's been lots of work undertaken about leisure. We mustn't forget that we did go to the private sector to do a design and build option for the current facility with that big major refresh. I think £2.5 million spent on that around about 2010. So what that did was it obviously extended the life of the current facilities, but things haven't stopped and we've continued to review. Ultimately, it comes down to affordability, and that's the big issue, isn't it? Trying to find something that meets needs and is affordable. And that's why there's been lots of projects looking at that from different aspects, trying to find a solution that's affordable to the council. And obviously there's a review underway again at the moment, using funding that we've got externally to try and again look at alternatives, particularly now since that time we've now got 2 sites as well, with the MSV site and obviously the Waterfield site.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add, I think I recall actually when I arrived, there was a procurement process that was out at the time when I first joined the council, which was looking at essentially new build whilst retaining a second site. So maintaining 2 leisure centres in Melton, and the outcome of that was that it was completely unaffordable, because what you had was 2 leisure centres essentially cannibalising each other and competing for the same territory. So that's why through the corporate strategy, we've now got a commitment to find a sustainable future for our leisure facilities, because that's what we've got to do, because we have got 2 dilapidating sites. We've got 2 sites which do not in and of themselves meet all the needs of our residents. One has a pool, one doesn't. One has a large sports hall, the other doesn't. So we need to address that problem. And as the chairman quite rightly says, there's quite an extensive piece of work happening around the health and leisure park at the moment. Obviously, the council also has an aspiration around the second GP surgery. So we're talking closely with the CCG and other key stakeholders like the town estate about how we might collaborate to build something that can answer that question ultimately, because these are generational questions. The Waterfield Leisure Centre was built in the 60s, I believe. So now is the time, as that dilapidates, we need to come up with a longer term solution that's going to be fit for the next generation. So it's very much a live question, and this committee will have a role in overseeing that project as the Chief Internal Audit has already described. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I've been on this kind of thing before. Risk registers are always a subjective matter to a certain extent. I'm quite surprised to see that the HRA business plan is still at as high a risk as it was even a year ago, because obviously, in my opinion, we've done an astounding job over the last few years to bring it back from where it was. Certainly within the last year, in my opinion, we've done a huge amount of work. We've actually looked at all the housing stock, well, 80% of the housing stock, and assessed it and all the rest of it. So I would have thought personally that the risk will be going down, because we've got the gas safety certificates been put in place, things like that. And to be honest, me as a member, I think it doesn't reflect well on our officers. So all the hard work they've done, we've still got the same risk level in place, because it surely must be coming down now. We've got the assets, you know, sorted. We've done the inspections on 85% of the properties. We know where we are. A year ago, I have to be blunt about it, even 2 years more, maybe, we didn't. And we were, even the chief exec would admit we're in a mess. And that worries me, that this isn't reflecting how much hard work our officers have put into this. And I'm sorry, I find that a bit worrying. The other comment is obviously the numbers strange to me, really, that, let's be honest, the failure to deliver MMDR after all we've put into it is a massive risk, because it would financially and reputationally have a huge impact on this council, with the amount of effort our MP and others have put into it, and the chief exec has put into it over the years. And failure to deliver that would have an effect on our housing and everything. And as a risk, that must be much higher than I see. You've only got a current risk rating of 6 on that. I find that a bit staggering when this council has invested so much effort and work to get that. And it is a high risk. We all know if the housing market went horribly wrong, the risk could be enormous on that and things like that. And therefore, once again, I find these numbers a bit strange, you know, and you've got 6 you've got for MMDR, 15 you've got for a leisure provision. Seems a bit strange, because the MMDR budget, I might be wrong, is massive compared to what might be the leisure provision. And the leisure provision arguably could be dependent on the MMDR provision. I can see the chief exec wants to come back on all of that.
Like the chief exec to answer in that one.
Chair, yeah, I mean, obviously my colleagues may wish to comment as well, but I just offer to a few reflections. I think you're right. These are subjective judgments, and they are debated, and we try and find the right level to reflect what we think the position is. I completely agree with you. The progress has been significant, and we cannot underestimate that progress on housing. I think the judgment we took is, until we've got the HRA business plan in place, and we move from the housing improvement plan, which is governed us for the last 2 years, into business as usual through the HRA business plan, which is imminent, as we know, and comes to council next month. We just felt we didn't want to preempt that. I think next time you see this, that risk will have reduced, because we will be moving from the housing improvement plan to the HRA business plan, which is about sustainable longer term future and certainly greater confidence in terms of delivery. So I think I would be fairly confident to say you'll see that come down significantly next time. In terms of the MMDR, you're right, it is a huge project. It is one that we are not entirely in control of. There are a number of moving parts, as you'll appreciate. I think the reflection of the lower risk there is that we now have a contractual obligation with the County Council and Homes England to deliver the southern section. So that increases that level of confidence around the MMDR delivery. Obviously, we have all the work that was done by this council working with our county colleagues at the end of last year, which was delivered successfully, and we continue to work positively with the council on delivery now. We have the plans to commence work imminently, at least some clearance work we anticipate happening in the next couple of months. And then substantive works taking place towards the end of this year. So as far as we're able to, recognising there are still things that are beyond all our control, I think we're collectively confident that we'll proceed. And that's what we've tried to reflect in the risk rating. Obviously, if things change or things become more unstable, then we would reflect that again in the risk register. But just to give you that reassurance, Chair, we do exercise a good degree of discussion and judgment around these things and try and find the right level to reflect that risk on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Ed. Councillor Posnett.
Thank you very much. I just wondered if I could have my interest recorded in this meeting, being as the MMDR has been mentioned. I've got a personal interest which could become prejudicial, and I'm also a member of both the County Council and Melton Borough Council. Thank you.
Councillor Posnett, thank you. I mean, if I could just say, I'm comfortable and understand why the MMDR has gone down with the agreement, and I can understand the housing and the leisure. And as we go forward, sometimes things, even though you think you're in control of them, there's still high risk items. It's not always moved down. I mean, from my point, from when there's a revision of the risk process, our role, if we can remember it going forward, is we're here to oversee the arrangements for risk management, that the right arrangements are in place. And what I'm personally looking for going forward, there's a couple of things, is the active involvement of cabinet and cabinet portfolio holders and scrutiny in the arrangements. And we should be looking at the officers, the portfolio holders, the arrangements, the departmental stuff, the senior stuff, and the involvement of the cabinet. And we should be looking to see whether basically the engine and the gears are going round appropriately, and then what plops out, you know, it has gone through that particular process. So that's what I've already mentioned it to Dawn. I think that's one of the key issues for me going forward. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, page 81 mentions homelessness and risk assessments around homelessness. I'm really pleased to see that topic on the risk agenda, because it has been said that homelessness is on the increase. So I think over the next few years, that's going to be quite an interesting one. I sometimes feel quite concerned that people say, well, I haven't really got a problem in Melton. Well, that's because they tend to have to go to Leicester or Nottingham to homelessness hostels. To me, it's like shunting the problem elsewhere, really. And I have known one or two people become homeless in Melton, and they have to go to Leicester or Nottingham. So I really think that is a realistic addition, and I think that's really courageous of us to put that on. I'm really interested in the point that there's going to be a greater focus on homelessness prevention being better than cure, obviously. So I'd like to see what comes out of that, what steps are taken. I once knew somebody made homeless for £150 debt on their water bill a few years ago, not in this district actually, and in every other way they're up to date with their payments on their rent, but for £150 they came home one day and the flat was blocked to them, and that was it. They were out, and it was dreadful. I just think this is going to be a really interesting piece of work, and well done to everybody who thought of that and put it on there, because I think that's very noble. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Chairman. The corporate priority is ensuring the right conditions to support delivery. Are we doing this with building the right houses for what people want, or are we caving into developers all the time and building 5-bedroom houses? Can we control this with risk?
I don't know whether that's a specific.
I think with the economic times we're going through, and probably will do for the next 4 or 5 years, we don't want to be building all these 5-bedroom houses. We want a lot more that normal wage earners and salary earners can buy. I mean, we've got it in our ward where they're reducing the prices virtually daily now on 5-bedroom houses, but you can't split them in two. That's the problem.
Yeah, just before the chief executive comes in, at a recent full council meeting, there was a housing strategy approved. And personally, I would be hoping that within the planning, the department's risk register, there will be some sort of link between that and the way that we conduct ourselves in planning. But I'll give it over to the
Chair. I think you said exactly what I was going to say, reflecting the housing strategy and the link with the planning team. So I think the mechanisms to oversee that are in place.
I mean, that I think it's a fair question to ask the portfolio holder when you meet him. Ask the portfolio holder when you meet him.
Yeah.
Thank you. If there's no other person wishing to speak, we'll go to the vote that the committee note the content. We're noting the content of the report and updated strategic risk register and associated risk register action plan as attached at Appendix A. If we could show those in favour by raising the hands, please. Unanimous vote. Thank you.
Oh, there was quite clearly a consensus, and I wasn't sure whether, because it was only a noting, we didn't actually need to vote once it had been proposed and seconded. If maybe we'd like to retro that.
Which one was that,
It
Councillor?
was, oh, I've just shut my one. It was the first report of Rachel.
Excuse me, if it's just to be noted, then it's just to be noted.
If I can come in through you, Chair, it was a report that's just to be noted, and that can be done just by the consensus of the room. And I think that, no, that's fine. I'm happy to clarify that.
Thought I'd actually done that for all of them. Yeah, okay. But thank you for raising it, Councillor. Thank you. Number 8, urgent business. I'm not aware of any urgent business for this meeting at this time, so I will announce the meeting is closed at 7:34 p.m. Thank you all for attending.